Welcome to the story, Kensington and the Fortress. You are listening to Episode 1, Ogres in the Garden. Nettles and thorns completely covered the path to the fortress, and though he could still see the spire as he scanned the faraway sky, his eyes could not avoid the monstrous creatures inhabiting the overgrown valley. Ogres meandering through the brush to harass any who still attempted a pilgrimage. These sinister beings controlled the trail ever since villagers allowed them to encroach upon what once was sacred. How has this happened? Kensington shook his head in sorrow. In what had become a daily thought pattern, Kensington rehearsed the recent years that brought about this mess of hopelessness. The cobblestone path climbing to the fortress had always been lined with cypress trees. Like soldiers, these regal conifers bordered both sides of the path, guiding each person's pilgrimage. Around a decade ago, weeds began to grow along the path, bursting through the cracks in the cobblestones. Once or twice, Kensington attempted to clear the weeds away, but the effort became cumbersome, and few others were interested in helping. How unaware I was of the speed with which the weeds would transform the landscape. He shook his head again. In no time at all, the path to the fortress was barely navigable. At first, devoted ones still pilgrimaged up the trail, but the hike was no longer easy. Soon many decided to alter their pilgrimage by choosing to simply smile at the thought of the fortress on the mountain. It became a justified practice for the faithful to remain in the safety of their homes instead of taking the trail to the fortress. The sojourn had become too difficult after all. Village leaders decreed it would be adequate to simply remember the prominent stone structure once or twice a year with a few words. The situation worsened when the first evil behemoth arrived. Previously, these creatures remained scattered in the outer edges of the kingdom, for they knew the strength of the citizens who diligently tended to the path. Once they observed weeds growing, however, they were emboldened. The negligence of the people provided opportunity for encroachment. For whatever reason, no one even tried to shoo away the first ogre. They thought about it and even discussed it, but none were brave enough to actually confront the monster. So more came. And soon the lovely valley garden was inhabited by giants. Now the way to the fortress seemed impassable. Still emanating a beam of light, the fortress remained visible. And despite being so overgrown, one could sort of distinguish the cobblestone road. As the path climbed, stone walls took the place of cypress trees below. But now, those stones were crumbling, and the strong cypress trees were covered with thorny hawthorn vines. Our people have forgotten the power of the fortress, Kensington mourned. They no longer desire the protection of its glory. They had buried the knowledge that the sturdy structure on the mountain was their only place of refuge. They disregarded what was still eternally true. The radiance of this stately citadel kept them out of complete darkness. For centuries, the bastion's brightness provided their source of vision. And with light surrounding them, they'd lived peaceful, joyful lives. Kensington remembered the years that included the regular gatherings in the lovely gardens at the base of the mountain. Exuberant dancing and singing characterized their feasts. No one was excluded, for each citizen respected the talents of the others, caring for one another with loving intention. At the end of the celebrations, homage to the fortress was given, as villagers would pilgrimage to the place of light, bowing to give thanks for the emanating beauty it provided. But as is sometimes the case, the gift of this granite guardian was soon taken for granted. Once weeds grew into thorn bushes, the people resigned themselves to a new way of living. Holding the opinion that grooming the garden and path must be someone else's responsibility, they simply went about their daily chores. Most were unaware that the ones who used to clear the path were either ill or dead by now. And though the old ones had cautioned the younger to maintain the path and garden, their warnings had not been heeded. Now people stayed in their huts, existing a day in and day out manner of life. Few even helped their neighbors anymore, for most had acquiesced to the belief that each family must fend for themselves. Were they to be honest with themselves, they'd admit they were denying the truth. It had been a grave error to allow the path to become so overgrown. It was a huge mistake to not fight off the fiends that had taken control of the Garden Valley. A false security hovered like fog, fostering a robotic existence. Rising from a hunched position, Kensington stood. He could no longer bear to see the once beautiful path and garden in its current state. He would no longer sit idly by while ogres inhabited what belonged to his people. He had to do something.